Is it on?
Oh, I think it is. All right, hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the big transport fringe debate. The big topic today is, are UK ports and airports the key to recovery? My name is Kate Andrews. I'm the economics editor at The Spectator, and I'll be your host for the next 90 minutes as we get to hear from some brilliant and very insightful people on our panel today and discuss the issue. So I want to involve the audience, our packed room today, as much as possible, get to questions as soon as we can. I might abuse my position as chair to ask a few first, and we'll get some opening remarks from our panel as well, but let's be sure to involve you. Because we're all having a fantastic time at conference. Dare I say, it almost feels normal. No masks, sitting in this room together, debating, discussing, drinking, and talking about ideas. But we leave the room, we go back out into the real world, and we remember that we still have a lot of recovery to do. Growth was rather stagnant in the month of July, basically came to a halt. We're not back to pre-pandemic levels, and there's absolutely no doubt that ports, airports, and transport overall are going to play a role in getting back to where we were, and hopefully when it comes to the green agenda, improving from where we were before, and making our systems more sustainable. So to talk about these big issues, I'm joined by a brilliant panel. We have Robert Courts MP, who's a Minister for Transport. We have Laura Bilimoria, who's President of the CBI. We have Councillor Linda Taylor, who's a leader and member of the Cornwall Council and LGA Environment, Economy, Housing and Transport Board. We have Richard Gutsell, who's the Director of Atkins. We have Madeleine Hallward, Head of Strategic Communications for the ABP Group. We've got Cllr Walker, who's the Co-Executive Director of the British Chamber of Commerce, and Andy Brown, Corporate Affairs Director for MAG. And I should say that we all owe a big thanks for the discussion that we get to have today and the food and wine that we get to drink while we do it, to ABB and to Atkins for sponsoring this panel. So we're going to keep our remarks brief, panel, because it's important that we get to questions as soon as possible. I'm going to start with Robert, who, as the Minister for Transport, can kick off this very important discussion. Set the tone, if you will, Robert, and then we'll go down the line.
Okay, thank you very much, and it's great to see so many people here for this critical debate on what are vitally important sectors for all of us. And as I answer the question, Kate, if it's okay, I'd just like to, just for a second, just pay tribute to not only how important it is that ports and airports play that key role in the recovery, but what they've done during the pandemic. Because as never before, we've realised the importance of logistics.
Oh.
Do you want me to boom out a bit? There you go. Is that better?
We're going to put it...
Let's get it closer.
Yeah.
There we go. How's that?
Better.
That better? There you go. I can hear myself echoing back now.
Come back better.
I have indeed. I've built back better.
Just before you go to speak, just stand up so that everybody can see you.
I'd be delighted, yeah, if that's what you'd like.
Can you do
Do you want me to do
some
that? So
modelling,
let's
please?
do that. So I'll stand up. I hope. Right, so in standing up, I may be further away from the microphone, but you'll be able to see me. And I'll project my voice in good barrister fashion. So, right, so you didn't miss much at the back there. I was simply saying that, A, it's great to see so many people here to play this part in what's a critical debate. And secondly, before we start talking about the role that ports and airports play in the recovery, which is massive, and I'll come to that in a second, I just want us all to pay tribute for a moment to the incredible work that they did during the pandemic. Because we've realised, because we've realised, as never before, the critical importance the logistics plays in our lives. Because all of the things that we rely upon, so much of the things that we look to for our everyday lives, are things that are brought in by aviation or by maritime. And that might be anything from PPE that, of course, we saw at the outset of the pandemic, through to things like the food that we eat, even the clothes that we wear. So much of this is due to the people, thousands of men and women, who over the course of the last year have, at times of often personal risk, certainly great uncertainty, certainly loneliness of being away from their friends and family, ceaselessly, in all weathers, worked every hour to make sure that we were supplied. So I'd just like us all to give a massive thank you to all of those sectors. And to answer the question, which is, of course, the role that are ports and airports the key to recovery? Yes, they are. They are because they're critically key to the people who live in them and to the people who work in them, those sectors themselves, the thousands of jobs that maritime and aviation provide throughout the world. And I'm just going to give you one example, just as a microcosm, which is to look at the cruise sector. And if we look at the cruise sector, that brings £9.4 billion to the UK economy on 2017 figures, 82,000 jobs. And the stat that really makes it come alive for me is £2.5 million into the local economy each time a cruise ship calls. Now, when you're looking at places like Southampton, for example, think of the incredible importance that brings to the local area. So, do we want to see more cruise ships sailing? Yes, we absolutely do. Do we want to see container ships coming in and bringing in the supplies and employing people? Yes, we absolutely do. And that's just looking at where things are at the moment. What about when we start looking to the future? What about when we start looking at the incredible potential that we've seen in these sectors, but we've got to see so much more of it? What about free ports? This incredible, massive opportunity, in terms of customs, but also in terms of regulatory output, that really gives us chances to, in those critically important areas, those port areas around the country, and airports as well, to really see economic investment in those areas. So free ports, an incredible opportunity. Then, of course, you've got the green, the decarbonisation agenda. It's a challenge. These are areas that are difficult to decarbonise, but think of the economic opportunity. The opportunity for all these areas that have ports and airports in them, so we can show the very best of British technology throughout the entirety of the country. So yes, they are the key to recovery, not just because of what they are, but because of what they facilitate. Because we can make real strides, take advantage of having an independent trade policy for the first time in 40 years. So we can reach out to these developing areas around the world and bring in goods and take out the best of Britain and export that. And we can do that because of the ports and the airports that are the lifeblood of this country. I could go on all day with enthusiasm on this topic. I'm not going to. I'm going to let the others speak, but I'm looking forward to your questions.
Well, I asked Robert to set the tone, and he certainly did. Thank you so much for that. We're going to start with Andy and work our way down. Now, I appreciate everybody might not want to project, and they might want to use the mic. So if you want to stand, great. If you want to sit with the mic, great. Just make sure that in the beginning you stand up and wave to our audience so they get to see your beautiful face. Thank you, Andy.
God, how do I follow that? Jeez. I think if I sat down, I'd just get heckled, so I have to stand up. So my name's Andy Brown. I'm the Corporate Affairs Director for Manchester Airports Group. For those of you who don't know us, we own and operate both Manchester Airport, but also London Stansted Airport and East Midlands Airport, which is one of the shortlisted ports for free port status. I would normally stand up and give this rousing speech about the importance of aviation or the jobs and investment it drives, but I think Robert's done my job for me. The one thing that I would stress is we know, I think everyone here knows the value in terms of employment, in terms of economic value add, but really case studies about the amount of trade and investment and tourism that direct connectivity to other countries drives. They're just so powerful. So in Manchester, we got our first direct flight to Beijing in 2016. And within 2 years, the exports to China had increased by more than 40%. The inbound visitor numbers to the Manchester economy from China had gone up by 38%. They spend enormous amounts in our local economy, and that happened because of that direct connectivity. So if we're serious about rebuilding after the pandemic with a global Britain agenda, we need to recognise, and I think everyone here hopefully would agree, that the international connectivity is a core part of that. So the question then, and I think that we'll probably come onto in this panel discussion, is how you build that connectivity back in a sustainable way. Obviously, aviation is extremely hard to decarbonise as sectors go, but the good thing is that we do have a plan, and that UK aviation is remarkably aligned, actually. We have disagreements on different things within the industry, but we're all pulling very much in the same direction on sustainability. And we led the world in terms of aviation sectors in making a commitment at the beginning of 2020 to reach net zero by 2050, in line with the government's wider targets. IATA, which is the international body for airlines, has caught up with us yesterday. They made a commitment to do that by 2050, but it's taken them over a year and a half to realise that it is possible, and the UK's led that way. The challenge, though, with that plan, we recognise it's not an easy plan, but it is a specific plan about what we'll do. I think there are two challenges. The first one is we've been through a really terrible time over the last year and a half in aviation. There's no point trying to pretend that hasn't happened. We're grateful for the support that Robert and his colleagues in government have given us. And the changes yesterday to the travel policy coming into the UK will help with that, and we hope that that trend will continue. But what that does mean is that we are in a weaker place than we were a year and a half ago, and that will be difficult for us to make the investments that we need to make to deliver that sustainable growth. But we are committed to it, and we look forward to working with government to achieve that. The second thing is the plan has some interesting and exciting things in it, like shiny new planes that run on hydrogen and electric fuel sources, but it also has some quite dull, unsexy but important things, like modernising airspace, like investing in sustainable aviation fuels, like coming up with complicated but important carbon pricing mechanisms that will allow us to really drive a carbon removals technological system that allows us to reach that net zero for aviation overall. And I think the challenge for us and the challenge for government is to make sure that we progress all of those strands of work, not just the exciting, shiny photo opportunities of hydrogen planes, for example, to make sure they're all moving forward and that we're banking those quick wins that will deliver progress in the first 5 to 10 years of that progression towards 2050 and not just yield benefits at the end of that transition period. My one final plug on that then is there are real opportunities now that we can bank. The really obvious one is sustainable aviation fuels. There are plans right now to launch sustainable fuel plants that are real deliverable plans that could have 3 plants up and running before the next general election and 14 by 2050. And all we need to do that is some support from the Treasury to underpin risky private investment into that. We're not asking the government to build these plants, we're just asking them to give private investors the confidence to go ahead and build what would be globally first of a kind plants. So I think there's a real opportunity for us to work together on that, and I look forward to doing it.
Thanks very much. Cllr.
Hello, I'm Cllr Walker, I'm Co-Executive Director of the British Chamber of Commerce. For those of you that don't know the British Chamber of Commerce, we're a network of 53 accredited chambers across the UK, a growing number of 75 international chambers across the world. Our members are 75,000 strong in terms of our number of companies we represent, and they employ over 6 million people across the UK. I was going to give a rousing speech about the importance of ports and aviation to our economy, but actually I think many of the other contributors have already started that. So I was going to just say 3 things as to why they're important. So first of all, obviously trade is a huge part of us as an economy, but also us as a future. And we know that through the access to aviation and also access to ports, the trade of our companies up and down the country increases with their access to different routes and to different flights. And I always struck by a chamber in the northeast who, the moment that route opened up to the Emirates, increased the amount of trade that they were doing with the Middle East. And it's really important that each and every small move means that companies have greater access to different markets. And that's why regional airports are so important. And Andy has spoken about some of those, because actually each of those link to an overall hub that then can give them much more facility to go to different markets. And one of the things we've been calling on the government for, sorry, we do have a government minister here, so is to actually give some business rates relief to those regional airports. They have been really hit hard over this pandemic, and we've already seen passengers' numbers only just starting to return for those larger airports, but actually the regional airports have got a long way to go. The second thing I wanted to say is the role of both of ports in the net zero agenda. One of the things that I love the most is going around the country visiting our members, and one of our members is the port in Lowestoft. Lowestoft is actually the main port for the offshore wind sector. What it does is it brings all of the equipment through. It's often also the place where engineers go in and out. And it's really important to recognise that ports and other transport sectors are helping drive forward the net zero agenda. And for every port, they're looking constantly at how they decarbonise, but also what they can do to support other sectors also decarbonise through bringing materials, goods and people through. And then last but not least, because our organisation represents all sectors and all levels of transport. And in fact, those of you who may have seen me talking on a rail debate yesterday, I wanted to stress the importance of an integrated infrastructure system. I actually think it's really important that it's not just ports or aviation, as much as you are very important, but that it's also road and rail. But that by working together, we can actually reduce the amount of carbon that we put into the climate. And the figure that always strikes me is for every single extra train that we have bringing freight up and down the country, we can reduce 76 lorries on our motorways. And that's a phenomenal reduction in terms of CO2. But that only works if there's hubs from aviation, working with ports working with trains, and that it's a fully integrated system. So very much, we've made some great rise forwards, but actually we need to do much more to make sure that it all joins up and that we're able to move forward together. It shouldn't be one mode of transport against another. It should be everyone working together. Thank you. Thank you for the debate.
Thank you, Cllr. Madeleine.
Thank you. Well, this is going to be interesting, juggling glasses, notes, and microphone. Hello. Lovely to be here. Thank you. The sharp-eyed of you will notice that I am not Julian Walker. He's been COVIDed, not personally, but a member of his family. And I have to say that's probably the least of the COVID disruption that we've all experienced over the last year and a half. And the Minister opened with a very sincere thank you to everybody in the transport sector who kept Britain moving. And I'd like to emphasise that by issuing particular thanks to our colleagues who just kept going throughout all ports. All our ports stayed open, our rail freight terminal, all 21, 22 with Hams Hall. And those of us who work in offices are very fond of saying that the way that we worked completely changed. Well, it did for those of us who don't work in the front line, but for those of us in the front line, their jobs didn't change, except they got harder. So you had to do the same job, wearing more PPE, with more distance between you and colleagues, and that is an extraordinary achievement, and I think that's the same across the whole transport sector. They really did keep everything going. So the answer to the question, of course, from an ABP point of view, is yes, we are the key to the recovery. I would say that we are recognised as an essential service, but increasingly I think our role as an essential partner for government in meeting its twin objectives of levelling up and reaching net zero. Ports are a part of that. And that's what I'd like to talk to you about. Grimsby is a great example of this. Small fishing town, historically incredibly important for that industry. As that industry declined, Grimsby is entering a new era as the world's leading hub for offshore wind operations and maintenance. That's an extraordinary pivot for a very traditional sector to make over the year or make over the years. And the fact that it's a port is a crucial part of that. You talked about Lowestoft. Lowestoft is one of ours, so it's a great example, Cllr. Thank you so much. Complete fluke there.
Yeah, we didn't coordinate at all.
Yeah, definitely not. And that's one of the that's a model that we are looking to replicate. It started in Greenport Hull, again on the Humber, a Siemens Gamesa huge blade factory. These are the kind of jobs, highly skilled jobs, that ports can attract when you have support for the offshore wind sector. So it's a really exciting time for us. And obviously we're decarbonising our own operations, creating jobs as we go along. The Minister mentioned Southampton. Thank you very much, Minister, for opening the cruise terminal. And I'd like to echo one of the points that Andy made earlier about the partnership between the private sector and government. The Horizon Terminal is a great example of a bold counter-cyclical investment. We pressed go on that project in September 2019 when cruise was stopped. Nobody could predict when it was going to restart. For that, thanks again for working with the government to help get that important industry going. And a catalytic amount of investment through the Levelling Up Fund, or the Building Back Better Fund, was the final piece of the jigsaw that we needed to press go on that investment. And the Minister, we timed it to celebrate your anniversary, really. Your first anniversary in role, came and opened it. And that's an extraordinary example. It's got sustainability baked into it. 200 solar panels on the roof so it washes its own face, and it's catering for the next generation of cruise ships. It's got shore power there so that ships that have shore power connectivity will emit zero when they're at berth. So it's a really exciting project and a great token of what can be achieved as we look at the role of ports. I finally just wanted to mention a couple of other sectors. I mentioned offshore wind. Hydrogen is another very exciting growth sector, helping the decarbonisation journey. Clean Maritime Fund funding was awarded to Project Mayflower, a feasibility study taking place in Immingham with Siemens Energy, Toyota and Uniper, looking at the feasibility of producing and transporting hydrogen. This is a game changer, and again, on the Humber, this is a model that, if proved, can be replicated in ports not just around the UK, but around the world. And finally, carbon capture, utilisation and storage. Again, this is a partnership that needs the role of ports, and we are stepping up to the challenge, and it's by getting that right that we can help to protect and create more highly skilled jobs in important employers that are currently carbon intensive, like British Steel, Tata, in all of those industrial clusters, South Wales, Southampton, and the Humber. I'm going to stop because we have got more panellists to hear from, but thank you for your time.
Thank you. Over to Richard. Absolutely.
Thank you. I hope everyone can hear me. Great. I'm Richard Gutsell. I'm a director at Atkins in our Ports and Borders business. Unsurprisingly, I am not going to disagree with the panel so far. We think ports are absolutely key to the recovery of the country. But I'm going to talk about three things which we think can accelerate that recovery and bring those benefits faster. The first of those is sustainability. Then I'm going to touch on digital and data. And I'm also going to talk about rapid market-focused delivery. If we look at the sustainability agenda, this is obviously key. We're in a climate crisis, and a trade-led recovery is out there in the potential. So how do we turn that around and create a sustainable competitive advantage for our ports? We've got a threat coming, and we're starting to see talk of carbon border tax. Put simply, they will charge a tax at the borders based on the material you're importing. That's clearly a threat to trade. That could dampen trade, and some of the talk looks a bit protectionist, frankly. But we have the potential, both through our free ports and our existing ports, to turn this around. If we know what goes through our supply chain, if we can identify the raw materials, if we can understand how they're manufactured, if we can understand how they're shipped, we have a much more granular knowledge of the carbon cost of each of those stages. And we can deliver a carbon tax based on the actual carbon cost as opposed to an arbitrary border levy. Now, in doing that, you create an advantage because many customers will want to know what the carbon cost of a product is. But more critically, you create a driver for change. So if you're the port that has that insight and information, you can drive the uptake of green fuels, you can drive the uptake of green manufacturing and the attraction of green businesses. And we think that the market out there, customers will start looking for that. They will look to ports and businesses that can provide that insight, that guarantee, that kite mark, if you like, on sustainable manufacture. So that's really key. And clearly that is data-driven. Once you know the data, you can calculate the carbon cost. And data is absolutely critical to our port sector and creating advantages to our port sector. To really leverage that, we think that we've got to see much more data sharing. Through data, we can analyse efficiency, we can analyse and de-risk infrastructure projects. There's all sorts of things we can do. Free ports should be the nexus of this. We've got 8 new free ports in England, more free ports to follow. So we think a condition of being granted a free port licence, the licences that we'll see in October, should be that those parties agree to share their data. And that's not simple. So in each free port, we've got competing ports, we've got competing landowners, and we've got a big dose of government as well. Not parties that traditionally like to share, talk the same language and work together. But it's absolutely key in realising these benefits and maximising the growth, the benefits that we can deliver, the jobs. It should come at a level above that as well. So as well as within the free port, they should share data across the free ports and across the ports to drive the national agenda, the national efficiency, sustainability agenda. Data can be used in the digital world. And the first stop along our free port development should be a digital twin. Very simply, that's a digital representation of the physical free port. Before you build it, model it. And model it some more and test it. Test it with COVID scenarios, test it with growth scenarios, make it resilient. That's going to give you a tool. It's going to give you a tool to deliver rapidly because you're de-risking. It's also going to give you a tool to take to your customers and show them the free port that you're going to build. Bring that vision alive. Which brings me to my last point on rapid delivery. And I think we've got a bit of a risk in free ports and in other government infrastructure projects. We need to really focus and deliver fast given where the country is. At the moment, there's a risk that we look too far to government processes and the business cases in the Green Book and the big government infrastructure project disciplines, which are important, but not as important as focusing on the market and capturing the businesses we want to see in these free ports. There's also a risk that the free ports turn internally and look at their organisation and their plans and everything else. And again, it's the market that matters. What we need to focus on are the kind of businesses we want in our free ports. We've seen some great examples in Humber and in Tees where they've captured wind energy businesses. Real great examples, but we need more. And I'm thinking of the businesses like Vertical Aerospace, electronic vertical takeoff and landing vehicle manufacturers. They haven't built a vehicle yet, but they've got billions of pounds worth of investment and a fantastic forward order book. That's the factory we want built in our free ports. So we've got to think of them. What is it they need? What skills do they need? What environment do they need? And let's build that through our free port and let the government processes follow. So that's it. I think really we've got a fantastic potential in our port sector, but we've got to get those levers, those things that can accelerate that development and maximise it, quickly sorted, make it sustainable, make it digital and data-led, and let's deliver rapidly, focusing on the market. Thank you.
Thank you. Lord Bilimoria.
Thank you very much. Kate, thanks for chairing this, and it's a privilege to be on this panel. I speak to you as president of the CBI, and Confederate British Industry, most people think speaks for just the big businesses in this country, and yes, we do, the FTSE 100, FTSE 250, but also speak for 190,000 members, many of whom are SMEs. And another aspect that people don't realize about the CBI is almost 200 of the leading trade associations in this country, from the National Farmers Union to the Law Society to most of the major trade associations in the transport sector, are all members of the CBI. And we have the international reach with our offices in Washington and Brussels and Delhi and in Beijing. And there's no question about it that the aviation industry supports about 500,000 jobs in Great Britain, 66,000 in the Northeast, for example, 48,000 in the Southwest. And here's a fact: only 3 constituencies in Great Britain have less than 100 residents working in an aviation job. It's quite a fact. The sector was worth almost £100 billion in 2019, and domestic aviation, which other speakers have spoken about, alone is £15 billion. 1.3 million jobs, the aviation sector. And here's another fact: 64% of UK business leaders see air travel as key to their future prospects. Yes, we had Satya Nadella. I was born and brought up in India, went to 7 different schools. And Satya Nadella, the chief executive of Microsoft, who went to one of my schools, in May last year, 2 months into the pandemic, said that the world has adopted and adapted to technology in 2 months, which would normally have taken over 2 years. Now, does that mean we're going to stop traveling? Does that mean we're all going to be working from home forever? Well, look at all of us here. We're going to be wanting to be with each other, meet each other, work, travel, fly. So I think this statistic, 64% of UK business leaders see air travel as key to their future prospects. So I see a great potential for air travel. And then global Britain. By the way, I've been speaking about global Britain well before our Prime Minister. I'm passionate and proud of Britain as a great trading power. But without a strong port and aviation sector, forget it. We've got to have that to be able to achieve it. Now, here's a fact, and I do believe we've got to be frank. Our competitors during this pandemic in the EU, for example, have offered far more generous support to the aviation international travel sector than we have. Heathrow fell from being number 1 to number 10 in the ranking of the busiest European airports. And please don't get me wrong. The chief economist of the IMF, I chaired the B7 before the G7, and this was in May. And she said the UK needs to be credited for the phenomenal support that its government has given business. 400 billion pounds of support. In absolute or per capita terms, that's one of the highest in the world. And she said your vaccination program is leading the way and one of the best in the world. So those two things together, she predicted we would have a good and robust recovery. So we're very grateful as business overall for the support that government has given. That's why unemployment today is 4.5%. People predicted it would be 10% because of the pandemic. It was 3.5%, the lowest level since the 1970s before the pandemic. Fantastic that things like the job retention scheme have saved millions of businesses and millions of jobs. However, the aviation industry didn't get some of that benefit. I mean, Heathrow Airport alone, the rates bill is about £100 billion a year. Manchester Airport Group, Andy, what is your bill?
It's about 50 million.
50 million. 50 million. And how much rates relief support did the aviation sector get? A little bit?
We got just about 40% of that through
40%.
the AGOS scheme.
So that's, so some support's been given, but the Europeans, in some cases, subsidize in a massive way. So and in spite of that, we've been pretty resilient. When it comes to Jet Zero, the CBI has made 6 recommendations to make the goal of net zero aviation by 2050 a reality, which includes investing in aviation and aerospace technologies, including electric and hydrogen. And we believe there should be a roadmap for the use of hydrogen in aviation to be developed in partnership with industry. And I think this is a key part. Throughout this pandemic over the 18 months, we have worked closely in collaboration with the government. I don't think we could have achieved all that we've achieved, whether it's the furlough scheme, whether it's VAT reduction 5%, whether it's the bounce back loans, if you remember, initially there were 85%, we got the bounce back loans, there were 1 million of them given, whether it's mass testing, without government and business working in close partnership and collaboration together. So, final point I want to make is, what can we do better? Could we have had travel flowing more freely if, for example, we'd used lateral flow testing and mass testing more? I was crying out since last August that we should have lateral flow testing used regularly. Government did eventually listen. You can look it up in Hansard in November when I persisted with this, and the health minister in the House of Lords said, Lord Bilimoria, you have won this argument and we're inspired by you. Government listened, and what, we get it now free to workplaces, free to our homes. It's fantastic. How many of you know of the school study that took place at Oxford University between April and June on lateral flow testing? Can I see a show of hands? Right, let me illuminate. April to June, 100 schools, 100,000 students, 10,000 staff, 10,000 staff. One group, bubble system. One person got COVID, the whole class had to go and isolate. Do you remember there's almost 1 million people who had to isolate at one stage, millions of children missing school. The other group, whoever got positively tested, isolated, everyone else carried on with school and just had regular testing. If they tested positive, they isolated, everyone else carried on. At the end of it, less than 2% of the bubble group tested positive for COVID, less than 2% of the people who regularly went to school and didn't miss a single day of school tested positive. So 98% missed school unnecessarily. Just imagine if we'd applied this, not the first lockdown. We possibly could have avoided the second and third lockdowns, and the economy could have carried on if we'd had lateral flow. Free, cheap, very cheap, compared with the £400 billion we spent. Anyway, better late than never, we now have access to that. So I think, and I want to conclude with this sector has suffered more I mean, my Cobra Beer, the hospitality sector, we suffered badly. Aviation suffered much, much worse. And you've been phenomenally resilient. And for that, I think we should all be grateful and proud of this wonderful sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Linda.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear. So I've got two hats on. I'm here representing the LGA, and perhaps more importantly, I'm here as the leader of Cornwall Council, and the Conservatives took Cornwall for the first time since Unitary in May. So we were incredibly pleased for that to happen. So just before the elections, the Prime Minister was in Cornwall and he put a challenge out to the Conservatives. He said, I need Cornwall to be Conservative because I've got the G7 coming. And I don't want the Lib Dems dancing on the beach at Carbis Bay with Extinct Rebellion. So the pressure was on. So for me, it was never more important that we did get that victory, because when I'm going to be name dropping here now, when I'm standing on the airport at Newquay waiting for Air Force One to arrive at Newquay Airport, which was incredibly surreal, and watching, the President of the United States coming in, and then watching Italy, Australia, and all these planes coming in, for me, that just highlighted the importance of your regional airports. And we were incredibly proud to host that. Cornwall is absolutely the county where everybody wants to come. I know some of you will disagree. And people want to get to us quickly. And so, airport travel needs to be really robust now, and we really need to have those links. Cornwall's very unique because not only do we, Cornwall Council, own our own airport, we've got a spaceport. So as you're coming in from, Lanzarote next year, as you're flying in from America, you might possibly see Cosmic Girl leaving Newquay Airport with its satellites. It's going to be absolutely amazing. Now, it will be the first launch of satellites. They're hoping to coincide with the Queen's Jubilee. That might be a secret, but I've just let it out of the bag. Anyway, we'll just see what happens. So for us, having Spaceport, and I've got my badge here to make sure I'm advertising it, it's so exciting. So for places like Cornwall, we've got such interest in our high tech now with space exploration. We've got geothermal, we've got lithium. And my ambition, because Cornwall is big and bold, is that because of our natural heritage with our mining exploration, I want Newquay Airport to be launching those satellites, those aircraft into outer space with mining technology, so that we're not going to allow the Chinese to take over the potential. Thank you. So, airports are incredibly important to us. We've also got a lot of commercial ports in Cornwall, and Penzance is the main commercial port for the Isles of Scilly, and we're hoping on hearing about some bids that we've got in on replacing our ferries. If we could hear that news, we could hit the Minister. While we're here at conference, we'll be very, very excited. So it's incredibly important to us, and with my LGA hat on, the LGA are absolutely incredibly keen to be working with our government, with our ministers, with our partners, to make sure that we can absolutely deliver on the importance of those regional airports, and also to help us achieve our carbon neutral ambitions. So for Cornwall, we're planting the forest of Cornwall to help meet our carbon neutral by the year 2030. So thank you.
A big thanks to our big Transport Fringe panel for setting out their key vision and ideas. Get your questions ready, get your hands ready to go straight up. I'm going to abuse my position as chair just a little bit because there was so much optimism and so much agreement on this panel. I do think it's my job now to pick holes in it and tear it down a bit. Because let's be honest, you can't have a big Transport Fringe conversation without also having a bit of a debate. So, Robert, I think your critics would pick up on three things that you said. The first is that free ports, all good and well, But really, are they creating new economic activity? Are they growing the economy? Or are they just moving economic activity from one part of the country to another? And you can make the case for that. You can say, in terms of leveling up, you want to focus on other areas. But the problem with your leveling up phrase is that it means somewhere else probably has to be leveled down. So how do you address that? Airports. Lord Bilimoria was flagging some of the support that was received, but if we look at where we are now, I mean, aviation cannot return to what it was until the government decides we can travel normally again. So many aspects of life are back to normal, but try getting on an airplane to go 2 hours to Europe, and it's costing you hundreds of pounds, multiple tests, serious security and screening over COVID. It's not normal yet. And then when it comes to both shipping and aviation, but especially aviation, I think the nice way of putting it is that these are hard to abate sectors when it comes to turning them green. That's really quite a nice way of saying it's near impossible with the technology that we currently have to meet a net zero target when we look at shipping and aviation. So the positivity is great, but is this really the full answer, not only to rebuilding the economy, but also to how's the government going to balance its green agenda with the way that shipping and aviation need to work?
I'll stand to reply, shall I, just so you can, I want to make sure you can hear me back. Right, Kate, brilliant questions there. And let me go through those one by one. So the first of all, free ports. So the criticism of free ports for everyone who's not up on this is, do they displace activity? I.e., do they just shift it from one part of the country to the other, or do they actually create more? Well, firstly, the free ports we have now are much more advanced constructs than the ones you've seen around the world in the past. In the world in the past, they tend to have been around tariffs, i.e. that you don't have to pay the tariff until you go over the land border and in. These are more like a combination of a tariff-free zone with an economic zone, such as you've seen lots of you'll have in local economies, in local government. So you can have regulatory impact as well. And the key point about this is that this is where these growing industries can take place. So a really good example of this would be the offshore wind industry that Madeleine referred to earlier. So this is an industry that is growing. This is an industry where you can bring trade in, and you can bring it in from elsewhere that isn't currently taking place elsewhere in the world. And where I'd really disagree, Kate, respectfully, if I may, with your position, is you said if you're levelling up, doesn't someone else have to be levelled down? Well, that mercantile approach to economics is one that I just don't agree with, and I doubt you do really. I know you're playing devil's advocate there. Because the whole point about economic growth is that you create growth and the whole country becomes richer and more prosperous and more successful as a result. And you do that by creating the conditions, and government does this, that enables business to thrive. It's not about government getting its fingers involved in every single aspect of economic activity, quite the reverse. It's about government creating a benign regulatory environment and a benign taxation environment that enables business to thrive, and that is precisely what the free ports are all about. So I remain entirely very, very optimistic about those. You also asked me about travelling normally. I mean, at the moment, travel isn't normal. I accept that entirely. There are still some restrictions in place. These are restrictions that none of us have ever wanted to introduce. You all know the reason why. It's because we've obviously, as a government, got to prioritise public health at a time of a public health emergency. But what you are seeing, building on the strength of the vaccine rollout, is a progressive lifting of restrictions as we're seeing the effect that the vaccines have. So you've seen, initially you had obviously the traffic light system, you have more countries going into that. As of 4 o'clock yesterday morning, we've obviously got a major new loosening up of travel restrictions, so that if you are, if you're double vaccinated, then you can come in and then you don't have to self-isolate, you just have to take that day 2 test. The reason for the day 2 test, which comes back to answers one of the points that Lord Bilimoria is making about lateral flow tests, is so you can genomically sequence, so that you can understand whether there are any variants coming to the country, to make sure that we're keeping an eye on what is happening. So travel isn't back to normal, but it most certainly is much better than it was a year ago, and we're in a much, much better place now, and we'll continue to get in a better place as we go onwards. Kate's also asked the point about both sectors are hard to abate, hard to decarbonise sectors, and she's put the question to me, doesn't this mean that this is impossible with the technology that we currently have? Well, of course, the flaw in that is the technology that we currently have, because the question assumes that technology won't increase, and it most certainly is. I'll give you an example. So a year ago, as Madeleine said, I went down to see Southampton when I started as the Ports Minister, and then a year ago I went back, and we have this incredible new cruise terminal with solar power built in, this real environmentally sustainable, real leading cruise terminal. In the same week, I went to see Cranfield University's Zero Avia, who flew the first hydrogen electric aircraft, which was the Piper Malibu 6-seater at the time. Last week, exactly a year later again, I went to see them in their new home at Cotswold Airport, which was RAF Kemble over in Gloucestershire, where they are now doing the next stage of work for a 20-seater Dornier that they have. So this is, and they've updated me on the work that they are doing. So is it there yet? No. Is it going to be there? It absolutely is. That's hydrogen electric, that's just one. There's also battery power electric, which will really help with regional aviation, as we've talked about already. Places like Newquay could really benefit from that. So by creating a sector that is profitable, that is forward-looking, and that is able to innovate, that technology will come along. But in the short term, there are other things that we can do. Think about this in 3 stages. The things we've just been talking about there are the things that I think Andy was talking about at the beginning, about the photo opportunity stuff, the hydrogen electric aircraft and so forth. That is true, and these are the things I've been talking about when I talk about people like Zero Avia with their hydrogen electric aircraft. That's a little way off yet. Doesn't mean there's nothing we can do in the meantime. In the very short term, there are efficiencies around turbines, around airframe design that are already happening. For example, the last flight I took on an aircraft was an Airbus A350neo. That may look similar to the Airbuses that were flying around when I was born, but it's totally different in every other way. They look similar, but it's made out of better materials, the airframe design is increased, and they are approximately twice as efficient and half as polluting as those aircraft. So those airframe efficiencies and technology efficiencies are happening anyway. It doesn't solve the problem, but it gets us a long way towards it. In the medium term, you have sustainable aviation fuels that, again, Andy's referred to earlier. And we have, as part of DFT, a £15 million Clean Fuels, Clean Skies competition, which is getting people, it's seed corn money, getting people to establish how these sustainable aviation fuels can work. The advantage of sustainable aviation fuel is that it can be created either from food stocks or from waste, and it can drop into existing technology. So whilst we're waiting for the hydrogen electric, for example, the hydrogen-powered aircraft of the future, blended wing bodies, all of that exciting space-age-looking stuff, there's a lot we can do around existing efficiencies and airframe design and sustainable aviation fuel that gets us there in the short and medium term. So is the technology there currently? Not quite, but my goodness, we're a lot closer than we were only very recently.
Is anybody on the panel concerned about the objectives that the government's laid out, its 2050 target, and the technology perhaps not being as fast or efficient as they need it to be in order to reach that?
I think I would say on that, I think it's a really, I think it's a really excellent question. I think what I hear from businesses is not that the will or the capability is there. But I was speaking to a business this morning, and I won't name them, who would be massively useful in this sector. And the key issue is investment. So we will have the capability of doing it. We will have the technology to do it. The ambition is 155 billion times right. It is whether or not we can find the perfect formula that brings both private and public sector investment at a scale. And this business was saying to me, actually I don't need the investment till 2024. And actually I won't actually need the money until 2027. But I need the indicators that this is going to go ahead. So I need all the right noises to start being able to bring people on from the private sector. And I need to understand the kind of framework and the rules of the game that the government is going to represent. And BCC is a cross-party organisation. And one thing I would say to this government, but I've also said at the Labour Party as well, because we have to go to both conferences, is that actually this needs to be a cross-party framework, because we're not talking about 10 years, we're not talking about 20 years, we're talking about setting technology for when I'm pushing up the races. So I genuinely feel that we can do it, but we also need to make sure that we get the investment right.
Madeleine, you want to come in?
Thanks. Yes, I completely echo that. And I think the example of hydrogen is a really important one. The feasibility study that we are a partner for in Immingham, that needs to be followed by confidence that there is a long-term policy helping those technologies that have been tried, the concept has been proved. How do we then give in private sector investors the confidence that the support will be there to kickstart the process and then give them a goal that they're pursuing in the long term? And I think what follows the initial seed corn that funds the feasibility study is really important. And as you say, Cllr, it has to be cross-party. And because I've got the mic, it would be remiss of me not to say a quick note on Freeport, echoing what the Minister said. Given that, can't help boasting, 4 out of the 8 English free ports have ABP involvement, I think I'm in a reasonable position to say we are very confident that the business cases that all of those free ports have put forward are based on a rigorous confidence that they are not, they are attracting new investment. They're in a position to do that. The package of measures that the Minister referred to is comprehensive, and it's the kind of package that if you're a business looking to invest, it's going to encourage you to go to the UK rather than a European site, perhaps. And we see that decisions that Siemens have made to extend Greenport Hull is a really good, that's the kind of decision that Freeports can help to do. I feel very strongly that they're an opportunity for new investment, not diverting investment.
Thank you. And Richard, you wanted to come in?
Yes, I'd just like to make a point on skills. So we see in the sustainable sector, the green sector, and the businesses that are going to deliver the technology that we've talked about, is the need for skills. We're privileged that we work in a number of those sectors, in aviation, in ports, on some of the really exciting stuff that's coming through. But we see now the dearth of skills in this space and the very rapid need we're going to see to get more people with the right skills. So government and local government, particularly around free ports, are going to need to address in their skills strategies, in their educational institutions, how we deliver the workforce of the future that these businesses will need.
All right, we're going to open it up to the audience. Yes, you may. We're going to come to you in just a minute.
Sorry, there's a couple of points I want. Thanks, Kate. Just wanted to come back on the point about partnership between the government and the sectors is key, because both ports and airports, aviation and maritime, are in this country private sector, so privately funded, privately run. That's not the case in other parts of the world. It's part of the reason for their success, because they're flexible, they're nimble, and you guys know as well as I do the testament to their success that you see. So there is clearly a role for government here. Obviously, government will continue to consider what it may have to do. But if you look at the Clean Fuels, Clean Skies SAF competition that I've referred to, for example, or the Clean Maritime competition in maritime, which is a £20 million competition, you're seeing government kickstarting this going. But let's not lose sight of the fact, and I'm very keen about this, and I know it's optimism, but I think it's optimism for good reason. The whole world is going to decarbonise. These sectors are going to decarbonise. And the question is how it happens and who leads the technology. And in terms of the UK, you're talking about approximately, it's estimated, £29 billion of economic opportunity for the UK here as well. So let's not lose sight of the fact that for private sector and private investment, there's a big economic opportunity here. It's really rare that you get the opportunity of a technological reset as you get here. So if you think about, the great aviation companies of the past and the great aviation designs of the past, it's very rare that someone says, yeah, well, that's been great. Now we're going to do something else. This is going to be different. So this is key. This is an absolutely critically important opportunity for the UK and its industry in both maritime and aviation. And the key is just the point that Cllr was talking about earlier, which is the way everyone is totally up for this in both these sectors. Every time I talk to any of these sectors, they are hugely enthusiastic, hugely optimistic, and they're going to make this happen. And yeah, it'll be in partnership with us, but it's their enthusiasm and their drive that'll make it happen.
And the enthusiasm and drive in this audience, I think, is really quite high. And we're going to get to your questions. So here's how we're going to do it. I'm going to take a few questions at a time. And then we're going to go down the line. And if each panelist could just answer in 1 minute and pick whichever question really speaks to you. That way we can get through a bunch and we can make this as interactive as possible. To my wonderful audience, you are allowed to give a speech on the condition that the speech is a maximum of 2 sentences long. And the second sentence must end in a question. So, hands up high. Please introduce yourself and say if you're representing anybody, including yourself. Gentleman over here. Yeah, you. Looking back.
I'm not going to give a speech, but thank you very much. Richard Ballantyne from the British Port Association. Really interesting discussion. discussion. Yeah, congratulations to everyone for this time here at the moment. Just to ask, perhaps for the Minister, Robert, I just wanted to know, a lot of it comes down to money. Now, you mentioned it's private sector organisations, but is there going to be funding for things like transport connectivity to ports and airports? And then perhaps to Councillor Taylor, I just wondered, on the planning aspects that have been, I think they're subject to review now with government. A lot of things can be fast-tracked through things like this development rights, but how do we square off that concern that local stakeholders have against creating an agile planning system that facilitates sort of rapid investment and development at our ports and airports?
Thank you. Hands back up. Gentleman in the back standing.
Hi, James Cox from Bristol Airports. Just tracking back to what was briefly mentioned about skills, there's obviously a huge amount going on decarbonisation-wise on aviation and shipping. But one of the big challenges we face is the deficit in skills to make that happen. What would be the sort of one big thing the panel think would be benefiting to close that deficit?
Great. Hands up again. Friendly reminder that women can ask questions too. Gentleman right there.
Love it.
Notwithstanding the recent hiatus of Heathrow Airport and Parliamentary around congestion and air pollution and air quality, and the government rightly identified many years ago that they wanted to improve connectivity by rail to Heathrow. I wondered if there was any danger of any progress happening on rail connectivity to Heathrow from south or the west.
Your name was?
I'm sorry, Neil Lindsay.
Neil, thank you. All right, so good questions there about connectivity and some overlap. But from Richard, we have questions about funding for transport connectivity and where's the money coming from. Robert, I fear we're going to be looking to you to answer that, but anybody else, please chime in. And also a question about fast-tracking planning systems, and if you do want to be building ports, more aviation expansion, how do you get buy-in from the local community? James has asked about the deficit in skills. What's the one big idea the panel has to upgrade skills when it comes to the transport sector? And Neil talking about Heathrow congestion and connectivity to other areas that aren't just London by rail. Linda, let's start with you.
Thank you. Well, I think we all know planning is planning. And at this moment, I can't use that word fast track. But here in Cornwall, we've got our emerging priorities and top of our list is turbocharging our economy. So for me, it's working very closely with interested parties to absolutely understand what they want, to have that engagement with communities so that they can actually buy in to what we want to deliver and to make the planning process as efficient as possible to enable that project to come to fruition. Thank you.
Thank you. Lord Bilimoria?
I'll address the skills question. I think there are a few things we can do, not just for the transport sector, but across the board, is the apprenticeship levy, I think, needs to be drastically reformed. And when I say I, the CBI thinks that it's too rigid. It needs to be much more flexible. And that would unleash so much. The next thing is the lifelong learning account. The government's doing just the right thing. I was on the Centenary Adult Education Commission, which reported 2019. That's being listened to now, and I think it's great news. The other one's Kickstart scheme. Another fantastic scheme, 16 to 24-year-olds. We said to the government, please extend that beyond December. They've listened. The Chancellor yesterday announced that's being extended. That could be really useful as well. Help to Grow Management. I sit on the Chancellor's Help to Grow Management Council. That's mini MBAs that open to any SME, and so many SMEs in this sector that can go £750, open to 30,000 businesses in the country, 12-week mini MBA. Wow, I mean, if I were an SME, I would do it. So look out for Help to Grow. And universities, businesses, FE colleges, businesses, working much more closely together in every part of the UK will help to address it as well. And I'm Chancellor of the University of Birmingham. We do it all the time, and it's really effective.
Richard.
I'm just going to reinforce your point on skills and apprenticeships. We have over 100 at Atkins. I never cease to be amazed by their enthusiasm, and the sector they really want to develop in is sustainability and green industry. We have to capture that and give them the courses and the guidance and the education they need. And I would urge other businesses to work with government and work with those educational institutions to bring those programs to life.
Robert.
Thanks. So if I can take James's point about skills first of all. So there's two things in particular we're doing, and obviously the essence of this lies outside either the Department of Education or with Bay, so rather than but within my department, just to give you an idea of what we're doing. The first thing is we've introduced something called the Aviation Skills Retention Platform, which is bringing together for the first time an online marketplace, as it were, where jobs that are available in aviation are being matched up to people who work in the sector and want to go transfer into those jobs. So that's something that's a major step forward in terms of improving skills. And we're also making sure that we advertise how amazing these careers are to people at entry level. Just as an example, if you look at the work we do with the aviation ambassadors through the general aviation outreach work, because that's the grassroots of aviation. It's getting young people interested early and then getting them interested in the skills sector that you may have there. And similar work's going on in maritime as well. But essentially, I mean, skills is vital. It is at the core of this, and we obviously have to work together with the sector and with our other colleagues in government to get the skills that we need. And if I can just tackle Richard and Neil's points about connectivity, clearly that's key. Earlier this year we produced the Transport Decarbonisation Plan, which looks for the first time at how to decarbonise transport in holistically in the whole, i.e. not just looking at, we've had the Clean Maritime Plan before, we've also got the Jet Zero Council as well, and the Jet Zero consultation looks at decarbonising aviation. I've referred to some of that already. But the TDP looks at all of it holistically, and that includes rail as well. As to what any commitments may be, I obviously can't make any commitments at the moment. We have a spending review coming up, as Richard knows. And Richard's one of my wonderful interlocutors in the maritime sector, and I know he'll be taxing me about this again later.
Madeleine.
Given that we haven't had the audience trick of delivering a speech that is posing as a question, I'm going to do the annoying panel thing of seizing on somebody's question and using it to give the answer that I wanted to give. Neil's question about connectivity. We've talked a little bit about, I think you're absolutely right, we do need to make sure that our airports, all parts of our transport sector, are better connected. And I think we really need to think about how we can achieve this to try and bring about some modal shift. Clearly, I think ports should be a very big part of that, but as somebody who's contemplating a journey to Hull later this afternoon, Transpennine connectivity holds a very special place in my heart, and we... Thank you very much. So I think increasingly we need to think about joining the dots and how we can try and shift as much freight as possible off our roads. Let's not waste this current not crisis, and think about how we can bring in more coastal shipping, perhaps for those cargoes that aren't time sensitive, but equally shifting onto the rail away from our roads.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great answer. I'm going to answer the question on skills, but I'm going to give the questioner a little bit of exciting news. So he may or may not know that the government introduced a trial scheme called Local Skills Improvement Plans. And those are 8 areas across the country where we are going to work. Business representative groups are going to lead the design of what skills are needed in colleges. And so long term, I'm very hopeful that if we can roll out local skills improvement plans, that will very much help address some of those challenges, not only in transport, but in other areas. And the little bit of good news is that there was a proper procurement process, and of the 8 trial areas, 8 chambers of commerce were successful, and one of those was Business West, which is the Bristol Chamber of Commerce. So I very much suggest that they have a conversation, because they are very much starting that process. But I think planning for skills is the fundamentally most important thing that we can do. And if I was allowed a little bit of political frisson, because we haven't had any, I would say that one of the things that we're really struggling with at the moment is that we have seen a market go from 300 million people to 30 million people, and we have a real skills deficit to address in this country.
Thank you. Andy.
I don't know if there are any colleagues from Heathrow in the room. They probably wouldn't thank me for commenting on Heathrow rail access, but the first thing I'll do is echo what Madeleine was saying about rail access to other ports. So I'm looking forward to seeing what's in the government's integrated rail plan, and then hopefully working closely with them on both HS2 through Manchester Airport and Northern Powerhouse Rail to make sure that Manchester Airport can serve all of the communities across the north as its international gateway. On skills, I think completely welcome everything that's been talked about here on the panel, and we absolutely support the competitions that the Minister's talked about. With respect, I think we need to go further than that, and I think there's an opportunity for industry to really drive that skills upskilling and job creation. I just keep banging on about SAF, sustainable aviation fuel plants, because that's what, if you talk to literally anyone in UK aviation, that's what they'll talk to you about, this great opportunity. And I think there's so much potential to be unlocked. Do all the competitions, absolutely, and we do support that, but there is a great role for example, the National Infrastructure Bank here to step in and support private industry to generate all of these additional skills. We're talking about 10,000 new green jobs in SAF technology over the next 15 to 20 years. So we can move now to lock in those opportunities.
Thank you. Another round of questions. Hands up. Woman here. Yep, with the braid.
Fran from Lexington. I just wanted to focus a bit more on sustainability because I feel it gets talked about in quite general terms and quite a lot. So this is actually quite a nerdy policy question as well, I suppose. But looking to kind of Manchester Airport's point about needing that kind of stake in the ground and that kind of point where the private sector can say, you know, this is a solution and we're not going to lose money on it as well. Is government interested in looking at a kind of competitive pricing mechanism like contracts for difference, for example? Is that something that government are kind of actively considering for aviation, given the success with the wind farms activity?
Thank you. Hands up. Gentleman right behind her.
Tim Morris, UK Major Ports Group. One of the other big themes that's come out throughout this conference is levelling up. I understand that one of the themes within the white paper on levelling up to come is about stimulating more private sector investment in areas of the country where it's underrepresented. What would the panel like to see from the levelling up white paper that would deliver both for transport, also its catalytic role in terms of regenerating communities and driving up prosperity?
Great. Hands back up. Woman in the second row.
Thank you. Councillor Jenny Johnson from University of Liverpool. Your messages are absolutely incredible, but they're not getting out there. What can we do to get these messages into the media about what both the government's doing, but also so that young people at universities understand your sector and the amazing work you're doing? Because this isn't getting into the curriculum. The negative message of zero carbon is getting to school curriculum, and there has to be an integration. I'm sorry, Minister, we cannot have a silo of transport when we've got a silo of education. We need to link those two together. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Fran, trying to break down that big concept of sustainability, talking about competitive pricing concepts, perhaps in transport, especially in aviation. Tim talking about leveling up. And Robert, I'm excited to hear your answer on this because I've been asking a lot of MPs at conference what leveling up means. I asked Michael Gove, well, I heard Michael Gove say it twice, and I got two different answers. So I'm excited to hear what yours is. And Jay, about looping in young people, getting transport and the innovation in it into the media, and also, Jay, to your point, education at the university level may be encouraging young people to go into these sectors to address some of the skills gaps that we've been talking about. So let's mix it up, and Cllr, we'll start with you.
Well, actually, I was going to take the levelling up question. So I've also heard many different answers as to what levelling up are. And actually, business communities have been talking to me about this, and our chambers up and down the country. And they're getting a little bit tired of the expression, Minister, I'm afraid to say. And actually what they're saying is, can we have some metrics around levelling up? Because otherwise it's just going to be a slogan that gets sort of banded around. And there's good political reasons for that, but actually, you know, we don't know what it means, and it could be meaningless. So one of the things that Chambers of Commerce are doing is regionally they're identifying the 3 investment priorities for each of their region. And then they're going to say, you know, if you want to level up, please make sure we do this. But I think we have to make sure that we actually move to a proper strategy. We very much hope that will come in the white paper, but I am concerned that we are hearing very mixed messages about what that truly means, and I think business communities will not be happy if in another 2 years there haven't actually been any crunch on the bones.
Thank you. Andy.
From a very simple answer to the levelling up white paper, I'd like to see explicit recognition of the value of infrastructure and particularly international connectivity in being a catalyst for everything that the government is doing across levelling up across the north and all of the other regions of the UK. And actually, weirdly, in that space, sort of Manchester's in the job title, but our group of airports means that we have a footprint covering a huge range of particularly England, but our catchment for Manchester stretches into Scotland and Wales as well, so we're genuinely interested in every aspect of levelling up. On the getting message out to schools point, I completely agree. We need to do more there. At MAG, what we have is a programme of education and outreach into schools, right from primary school all the way through to further education through a system of what we call aerozones for primary school kids all the way up to airport academies at all three of our airports, which is partly about getting that message out, exactly as you're saying, but also about making sure that, go back to the point earlier, we have that pipeline of skills for the aviation industry that we can draw on from our local communities. So I think you're 100% right, we need to do even more of that, but the good work has started already.
Linda.
Thank you. So Cornwall's put in for its what I call Devo 2 deal, and part of that is asking that I have a 10-year plan where I'm going to know exactly what our SPF funding is going to be, so we can start planning for the future. But it doesn't always have to be all about government funding. For me, we've got Goonhilly satellite station in Cornwall, and they need the government's influence and direction, especially in relation to legislation. So for me, it's going to be a really good working partnership. And for children and youngsters in Cornwall, I'm seeing this as an opportunity under Levelling Up, so that they don't see Cornwall as the place where you have a career in tourism. I have this ambition of being the Silicon Valley of the UK because of our space technology that we're going to be delivering here. And for Cornwall Council, I think we're going to be incredibly well placed to have those conversations with our universities and further education and saying this is what we've got on our runway, excuse the pun, and absolutely work together to deliver on those levelling up opportunities for everybody in Cornwall. So that's how I see it.
Lord Bilimoria.
Yes, if I may also address the levelling up. The term I would the way I see it, and I link it to CBI's. Of course, we lobby on behalf of our members. That's what we've got to do. But we also try and lead the way. And we've done a lot of research over the last, earlier this year with McKinsey's. We've come up with a document which is the economic strategy for the UK for the next decade called Seize the Moment. And Seize the Moment says about £700 billion worth of opportunity if we do certain things. And there are 6 pillars. One of the pillars is this concept of levelling up and regional prosperity. So that's what I see levelling up as, is can we spread the prosperity around the whole of the UK over and above what's happening in London and the South East. Not instead of London and South East, it's got to be in addition to London and South East, because the better London does, the better the whole of the country does, and the better the whole country does, the better it is for London. So I don't think it's an either or, it's an and. And one of the aspects we feel that we can achieve this is the concept of clusters, is to promote clusters around the country. Of course, everyone looks at clusters. Which is the best cluster that we have in the UK that already exists is probably Cambridge, around the university with its Acorn Computers, ARM, and now it's gone into life sciences. So Oxford AstraZeneca, but AstraZeneca's headquartered in Cambridge. So that cluster concept, you look at the Northwest, you've got clusters here. You look at Bristol, you've got Aviation, Leonardo, Airbus, Rolls-Royce. Northeast, you've got wind, power. You can West Midlands, you think automatically just automobiles, but there's more. There's services cluster there as well. So I think we can promote that. The final point what is linked to all this is investment. What we've got to do now, particularly after the pandemic, the government more than ever is to invest. We underinvest compared with other countries around the world. If we invest more now, that will power the growth, which will create the employment, which will pay the taxes, which will pay down the debt. And an aspect linked to levelling up, I conclude with this, is research and development and innovation investment. We punch way above our weight as a country. 1% of the world's population, 16% of the world's leading research papers. Our universities are the best in the world along with America. Cambridge has won more Nobel Prizes than any American university. We're fantastic. But we only spend 1.7% of GDP on R&D and innovation. Germany 2.7, America 2.8, Israel 4%. Just imagine if we spend 1% more per year, £20 billion more per year. Wow, look what more we could achieve. So we need to increase our investment, particularly in R&D and innovation.
Thank you. Richard.
Levelling up, I'll take levelling up as well. I'd like to see a big role for digital connectivity in that. At Atkins, we like nothing more than a big infrastructure project. But actually, if we look at what businesses want, if we look at a catalyst for skills growth and for education, digital connectivity is key. 5G, fibre, that could play a really important role.
Thank you. Madeleine.
Thanks so much. Tim, great question on levelling up. I mean, like Andy, our footprint stretches across much of the UK, Scotland, England and Wales, and many of our ports are in parts of the country that feel they have been left behind. So that there are various programmes that are important. We've supported a bid by the Wire Council in around Fleetwood for the Levelling Up Fund. We're very much hoping to hear some good news later on this month about that. But I think how to stimulate those parts of the country and attract investment requires something that I think has elements of what used to be the Regional Growth Fund. What that had was the flexibility, a very clear bar around the burden of proof being on the applicant to demonstrate additionality, high quality jobs that could be committed to for a certain period of time, and it wasn't aimed at a particular sector. And while I think that some of the competitions and programs that have been running at the moment are very, very helpful in their narrow focus, actually a fund that is much more flexible and much more open to all and could be applied anywhere in the country to any sector, but has these very obvious bars to clear on additionality and jobs created and the high skills, that is something worth thinking about and bringing into the conversations. We're always going to say we want more money. And Jane, that was a really great question. As somebody with comms in their title, I'm gutted to hear that the messages aren't getting through, but I have to agree with you. You're absolutely right. And I think that it requires all of us to work together much more collaboratively. So the onus is on us, where we have ports, to make sure that we are engaging even more with the local schools, with the university technical colleges that have a crucial part to play in building the skills that are required for tomorrow's jobs. And as parents, we have a job to try and prepare our children for jobs that don't yet exist, that we can't even describe, and creating that sense of excitement. But I think we do need to try and achieve a cultural shift around the thought that the traditional academic route is the way to get a valuable, high-skilled job. It might be for some people, but equally it might not be for other people. And I love the idea of really starting to focus on the excitement and the opportunity. It's very easy to get downcast about the challenge of decarbonisation rather than the excitement and the opportunity that's there.
Thank you, Robert.
Right, so lots to address here. Now, I'd like to start, is it Jay or Jane? Jenny, I'm so sorry.
Sorry. I heard Jane. I'm so sorry, Jenny.
I heard Jay. Jenny. So Jenny, your point about siloing, I quite agree with this. You're quite right. You know, and I was just giving an example of something we do in our own department. But if you look at the way we've set up the Jet Zero Council, for example, that brings together the Bays department and DFT because we both hold important, areas of work here. And then we bring in industry, academia as well. That's quite a glowing example, I'd suggest, of how we can tackle particularly decarbonisation and bringing everyone together and not having the siloing you quite rightly refer to. So don't worry. You know, we do all talk to our colleagues across government at all times, but that's an excellent point. Answering your second point, I'd just like to refer to some things that Lord Bilimoria was talking about around clusters, because there's fantastic clusters around. He's referred to some of them, but there's some great ones in maritime too, and I'm thinking particularly of the Southwest cluster. I went down to see some of those guys down in Plymouth recently, and of course, you'll be very familiar with that from a Cornwall perspective, and also Mersey Maritime, for example, who do an amazing job in exactly the same way. What does this mean? Some of it is down to all of us, frankly, just to enthuse in the way we all have been today. Word of mouth is hugely powerful, particularly talking to people who might not think that a career in aviation or a career in maritime is for them. For example, there are nowhere near enough women in maritime or aviation. Nowhere near. There's a vast, untapped well of talent there from people who just who don't naturally think about that. Same thing goes for STEM, which goes to the STEM question we were answering earlier. So, long way of answering. It's down to each of us as individuals to enthuse and to talk to people we know, but it's also down to us to work with people in our areas, as people like Mersey Maritime do, for example, as the clusters do, to make sure that people get together and say, well, you might have a company, you might have a school or a university, I might be working in maritime or aviation. Let's get together and see what we can do together. It's hugely, hugely powerful. in those areas. So that's outstanding. In terms of levelling up, probably looking at Kate's question here, I mean, it will depend, I think, on what your perspective is, won't it? So you're going to get a slightly different answer because it'll depend on which way you're looking at it. But I think essentially you'd be...
What's yours?
I can give you that. But look, I think at the heart of it, it is the ability of every person and every area to achieve its full potential. And that's what it's all about. You'll hear in due course when the white paper is released as to how we're going to do that. But in terms of what it's all about, that's what I think it's all about. And everything we've been talking about today in aviation and maritime illustrates how that will be done. In terms of Fran's question about sustainability, there is, as Kate will want me to plug, a debate shortly on that very topic about which you may wish to come along to, everybody, where you'll see certainly a repeat from us too, as we're both in that as well in an hour or so's time. But look, obviously this is quite a complicated area. We are consulting on a number of these points, and we'll consider whatever options there may be. There's quite a lot of consultations out at the moment, things like the Jet Zero consultation that we are just considering responses to now, and the competitions that I've mentioned already. So whilst I can't go any further at the moment, this is the sort of thing we'll be considering all options.
We have about 5 minutes left, so to wrap up, what I want to do is go down the line one more time, 30-second answers from our panel. And it was a point raised by Cllr when it comes to this phrase leveling up and what exactly it means. What are the tangible outcomes for transport? What would leveling up in transport look like? What would the deliverables actually be? So if each of our panel could just say a few very brief remarks about how they think we will have successfully leveled up ports and aviation if it were to be achieved. And Andy, I'll start with you.
I don't think I've got a different answer from what I said before, which is, so I actually live in London. I work a lot of time at Stansted, our airport down there. We have excellent public transport mode share to get to Stansted. Heathrow has fantastic access from all sorts of directions and plans for even more directions from the west and elsewhere. And I think that the thing that is a real key to unlocking levelling up is to make sure that our key pieces of infrastructure, we're here talking about ports today, ports and airports, but it's true for all sorts of other transport nodes, have that same great infrastructure, public transport access that parts of the south have benefited from for many, many years.
Thank you. Claire?
All that he said. And I'm going to go on the broader infrastructure. So I think we can only have this if we have a broader infrastructure point. So we obviously have great advocates here for ports and aviation. They don't need me. But I think we need to, controversial probably for this conference, but deliver HS2 in full and then look at the next one.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Madeleine?
What they said. Absolutely what they said. And I think also thinking about the really attractive package of incentives that come with free ports. When we look at what we jokingly refer to as fettered ports, so what about the unfree ports? How can we think about a way of diverting catalytic forms of investment towards those ports to make sure they're making the most of their opportunity, whether it's proximity to offshore wind, whether it's space that could be used for port-centric manufacturing and needs a little boost, whether it's hydrogen production, etc., and connectivity, absolutely connectivity, transpennine, but all of it. Let's get modal shift right. Let's think about how we can do more coastal shipping.
Robert, what specific metrics would you be looking at to decide whether or not you had done your job?
So I'll go back to answering this by the way that I began, which is firstly, there are two parts to this. There is firstly rebuilding the sector back to its 2019 levels. That's the first part. Recovery from COVID is always going to be key to this. And the second part of it is clearly going to be harnessing the power of the free market to make the most of all of these areas, to build on the success these sectors already have, not just through decarbonising, that's a big part of it, of course, but also outreaching to the rest of the world to make sure that we have greater levels of exports and imports, so that we are using the free market to create jobs and opportunities within these sectors for everybody, wherever in the UK you are.
Richard?
I think we have to embrace the future. We will see electric aircraft, we will see drones. in the skies shortly. It's probably not as far away as some people think it is. We're designing them now in this country. If we get the environment right, if we get the free ports right, we can manufacture them. And that's where it really scales up and creates more jobs and flow down those skills. We've got to create that environment so the businesses locate here, otherwise we could see that go elsewhere.
Lord Bilimoria.
Yes, investment. I think if we invest seriously and we attract inward investment, second largest recipient of inward investment in the world, this country, that's going to be key. Connectivity, not just north-south, east-west connectivity, regional connectivity, really important. And then two things. You ask young people two things that matter to them more than anything else. All surveys show this. One is climate change, biodiversity, sustainability, and the environment. So this levelling up has got to have that at its center. And the second thing that really matters to young people is diversity and inclusion, something we haven't spoken about at all. And I'm the first ethnic minority. Well, you'd mentioned it, you did. Sorry, Fair Minister, apologies. But I'm the first ethnic minority president of the CBI in its history, and I think I've launched something called Change the Race Ratio. Look it up to promote ethnic minority participation across all business. Thank you.
Thank you, and Linda.
Thank you. So between Newquay and Exeter, we've had a recent hybrid electric flight. So I would absolutely want to see more investment in there. I'd want to see supporting confidence in our communities. That's going to be done by us giving out those positive messages. It's obviously got to be done in partnership with private investment. It's got to be done in collaboration with the government. And I think for me in Cornwall, it's absolutely letting that message get out to our community that this is our future and this is something that we can invest in, and it is going to provide a real opportunity for our residents in Cornwall and for our youngsters to be engaged in an absolutely exciting sector. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining this fantastic discussion. I want to say a really big thank you again to the Associated British Ports and to Atkins for sponsoring this event, for making it possible. A huge thanks to our audience for your participation.
This is return big, right? We were the troublemakers, but we had no one stand.